Many people have said that when we make a value judgment about something, that it's kind of assumed, it's just taken for granted, that we're not actually making an objective truth statement or claim about that thing, but we're just merely expressing a personal preference. And I'd like to know how they know that. It's never been taken that way by myself. And of course, if we live in a society where the majority of people are religious and actually do believe in objective morality, then we're all speaking different languages, right? Because when a Bible-thumping wingnut says rape is immoral, it means something different than when a secularist says that rape is immoral, right? Because he's expressing the belief that that is absolutely objectively wrong, and the other person is saying they don't like it. And what is the difference in the kind of teeth that those two approaches have, right? Now, I'm not making the case, obviously, for theistic objective morality, because I don't think it actually is objective. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if that's the case, if when we make what seem to be objective truth claims about a proposition or a person or an activity or an action, we are really just stating a personal preference, then we should be more honest in our language, because it's completely misleading and I would say disingenuous to say that is immoral when you really mean I don't like that. Because if there's no objective right or wrong, then what even is immoral? Does morality even really exist then? Or are we just talking about a bunch of personal preferences, things that we like and don't like? And there are actions that we don't like. We could say we like music because of how it makes us feel. We don't like being punched in the face because of how it makes us feel. But is something objectively right or wrong in that? I just find the language is very misleading. And it's funny because everybody's telling me that this is just taken for granted. It's assumed in society. Well, I guess I didn't get the memo, right? I didn't get the memo that when someone is saying to me, my stance on abortion is wrong, that they were just saying, I don't like your stance on abortion. But there's no actual objective right or wrong. So, silly me, I guess, for having some expectations that people would say what they mean and mean what they say and use some deliberate language when speaking about very important issues that people feel very strongly about. I mean, they certainly, they get very passionate about these things. And in some ways, it's kind of new to me. Not people being deceptive with their language, but in this area. I'd never really thought of that before. And so I had to think a little bit about why people might do this, why people might, use this sort of absolute objective sounding language to express mere personal preferences. And I'd actually made a video outlining a couple of reasons I think people might do that. And I'd recorded it and it just went, I don't know where it went, but it didn't take for some reason. And in some respects, that's a good thing, because in the meantime, Leonhard Euler 1 had posted a comment to my video where he posited another possibility that I hadn't thought of, and I think it's a reasonable one. So, all's well that ends well. Sometimes all's well that just ends. But in this case, he had said, I'm not sure why you keep going on about this this language issue. I don't see why you think it's so strange that people who believe in subjective morality would still be using this sort of objective language, because really it's essentially a remnant. It's a leftover from our history when the majority of people believed that morality was objective. And we just continue to use the language much in the same way that people say today that the sun is setting and the sun is rising, which is a leftover from our sort of geocentric past. And I think that's a reasonable suggestion that's why we might be doing that. Now, I would say, of course, I think that the issue is of far too much importance to rely on that or to do that. I think if we really want to engage in really important social issues, we should be honest with our language. And of course, it's much more important than these sort of almost colloquialisms about what the sun is doing, right? When we all sort of know, it's save for a few YouTube loonies, we all pretty much know what's going on there. He went on to say that he's not sure why it's so important to me. Why do I, that people would use language that doesn't actually really describe what they mean. And it's important to me because I didn't realize this was happening. I had thought when someone said to me that rape is wrong, that they meant it objectively. I didn't realize that people meant, oh, I don't like rape, or I think rape is wrong. And of course, in a world where, or certainly in the West anyway, in a situation where we still have actually a majority population that is Christian or religious, and one could surmise that a lot of them, probably the majority, submit to objective morality, we've got a bit of a communication problem between the secularists who believe in subjective morality, or anyone who believes in subjective morality, and those who think otherwise. And so some have said to me, it's a little bit silly to walk around saying, it's my personal opinion that rape is wrong, but there's no absolute moral, right or wrong. Well, I think it would be equally silly, or more so, to have to, sort of research someone's background and their belief system to glean what they mean when they say something, when all they would have to do is simply say, I think rape is wrong. Honest and simple, right? We've got this communication issue. It doesn't work to just sort of rely on, it's funny because the people have actually said that to me. It's taken for granted. It's assumed when someone says rape is wrong that they're just, well, no, it's not. Not if you're talking to a theist. How do you know when you're speaking to a group of people that they understand what you specifically mean? So I think it's a bit of a cop-out, and I'll outline why I think that might be shortly. The other thing that he did say towards the end of his comment was he wasn't sure why we're discussing this at all, the language issue, because it doesn't change the objective fact of whether or not morality is objective or subjective. And I agree with that. Of course it doesn't. The reason why we're discussing it is that was sort of the origin of this particular video series on my channel, when we were discussing a Stefan Molyneux video called The Bullshit of Moral Relativism, wherein he discussed the differences in language that people use when they submit to moral relativism, culturally or geopolitically or whatever, or they have the belief that morality is subjective, versus the language that they use with their children's very absolute sounding commandments that they make when they say what is right and what is wrong and what to do and what not to do. And that was sort of the origin of this discussion. Probably best, if you're interested to know more about that, to reference the Stefan Molyneux video, which was linked in my original video. Started at about 11 minutes or so because there was some stuff that was kind of irrelevant at the beginning of the video, but that's why. Going on to some of the reasons why I think, aside from the first reason given by Leonhard Euler, that people might do this, use this objective, absolute sounding language when they're actually just speaking about personal preferences. And the one reason I can think that people might do that would be to cloak their preferences in a way that might make it sound like it's got more importance, more weight, that quite frankly it probably doesn't deserve if it really is just the personal preferences of 1/7 billionth or so of the population of the planet, right? And of course, keep in mind, it's not just the language, it's the emotion, it's the body language, it's the thrust of the argument. And I mean, people get very impassioned, and that adds to the absolute nature of the way the argument is presented, right? A woman's right to choose. That's very passionate, right? And it's very absolute and universalized, right? All women, you're saying all women, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute, if everything is subjective and there's no absolute right or wrong, how do you even get it right? Much less, how do you universalize? How do you bestow that, to other people, right? If it's just your subjective preferences. So I think there's a lot more to it there. And again, I really wish that I had made some videos dealing with some more contentious issues, because I think I would have a lot more of those kind of, not just language, but complex arguments made that would be very, very useful in dissecting here to illustrate what I'm talking about. And then the third reason that I think a person might use this objective sounding language is a thought that I developed when I was at my dad's place the other day. And so I think I'll just cut to that video. Probably should issue a trigger warning. I used some pretty direct language in that video. And so with that said, take it away, me. Recognize that your language betrays some sort of an acceptance of or utilization of objective principles, or you need to change your language and change your modus operandi. Because someone had said to me, yeah, slavery could come back if it was, agreed upon by the majority of people and a wise group of elected men, obviously referencing, the different levels of government and whatnot that exist in the U.S. and in other places where we don't have a true democracy. Because there's a recognition that would essentially be a tyranny of the majority. So, but your language betrays you, because a wise group of men, what does that even mean? If everything is subjective, how could they be any more wise morally than anyone else? That alludes to an ideal. And if by wise you mean that they sort of have more objective facts at their disposal, they're more learned, well, once again, you are alluding to an ideal. Because if morality is simply subjective and there's no sort of objective standards, then what would having any more facts at your disposal do in terms of making you more moral? It's kind of interesting. We'll use these terms about being more moral. Atheists will say to self-same atheists that will often claim that there's no such thing as objective morality will say to Christians, I am more moral than your God, and so are you. By whose standard? Not them, not their proposed God, just by your standards. Or we'll talk about having a moral compass. Well, what use compass that doesn't reference an objective north, an objective direction, right? I really think the language betrays some sort of an acceptance or even just a blind reliance on an objective set of standards. And I was wondering why that could be. And I think a couple of the comments have illuminated that for me a little bit. Freighter Chaos admitted that he just plain doesn't like the idea of an objective morality, and that he actually knows that that's just an opinion. And I'm not attributing the following to him necessarily, but I think that's the case to a large degree, and I'm really actually impressed that he would admit that. I think that's actually really honest and a good thing in the discussion. It's important to admit when things are unfounded opinion. I have a lot of those too. So, and again, the following is not meant to be directed towards him, but I thought to myself, yeah, I think a lot of people maybe even irrationally claim that morality is subjective. In fact, that would be my premise, that it's an irrational claim, because it can't be universalized for all the reasons that I've said in the videos leading up to this one. And I thought, well, why would that be? Well, I think it's necessary on some levels as an ex post facto justification for a lot of inconsistency in the way that we govern ourselves and the way we treat one another. So what do I mean by that? Well, I could use a simple example: subjective morality, and then the double think when it comes to, for instance, raising our children, which I think is the best example, because those are the ones we make the most sort of moral pronouncements to, right? And so the easiest example for me to think of at the moment, deficit spending. So, we may have some sort of moral principles, and then we sort of have a selfish personal need on some level, and then we abandon our principles, right? We spend money that doesn't belong to us, that belongs to people that haven't even been born yet. I mean, we are enslaving. We say we don't believe in slavery, but we are actually enslaving people who have yet to grace this planet. So, excuse me, Tommy, give that back. You don't take that from him. What? Excuse me. Where was it? No, it doesn't matter if he wasn't looking. That makes it worse. Sorry, where was I? Oh, right. The hypocrisy of these principles and the justification for them after the fact. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for people starting to make arguments to me as to why deficit spending is acceptable. If we have a principle It should be a hard and fast principle. And I think the reason that people are arguing for subjective morality is it makes it easier to stomach all the discord that goes on with the way that we treat one another and the way we conduct ourselves. If theft is immoral, if it's wrong for Tommy to take a toy from Johnny, then it's wrong for you or me to take money from Tommy or Johnny, especially while they're not looking, i.e., before they're born. However, if we say that there's no actual objective rights or wrongs and everything is subjective and the only way to come to consensus is by some sort of will of the majority plus possibly the will of the minority stacked on top of a bunch of wise men, but there's no objective here. They're just... then we can sort of cope with ourselves from day to day. Chew on that. All right, I think we'll leave it there for this particular video. I've stirred up enough shit for one day. Thanks everyone for watching.